I'm covering myself.
And we're live. Peter, good to see you again. How you going?
Yeah, it's been a good week. How about you, Phil?
I'm doing pretty good as well. And I really wanted to have you back on because we did something pretty different in the last episode. And generally, when I try to analyze and do my own feedback with recording YouTube videos, I try to have some kind of metric outside of comments and views to understand why did it pop off. And I'd like to think I'm getting better slowly. And I generally feel like you're a good speaker. And what I pick up is if I was listening to a podcast similar to this, what parts would I find interesting and what parts wouldn't I have find interesting? And part of that is on me as a host to really have really good questions and trying to keep people engaged. But I've started to notice storytelling is super, super important, and more people are more keen on understanding someone's backstory because they want to be related to what their story is. And there was a sense when you were talking about your corporate job and transitioning, as well as how consistency was affecting you when you're on holidays. When I was going thinking back to that, that really was like, oh, okay, I'll definitely listen to something like this if it was on like a bigger podcast. But I wanted to get some feedback on what you thought about how the first podcast went for you.
I think it went great, and there's some things that I could work on, but I think the general flow of it, the storytelling, the authenticity really was what I was trying to show. I wasn't trying to hold anything back. I wasn't trying to play it up for the camera. It was just me talking to a friend, basically. And that's what I want to continue doing.
Love it. I love it. So you said you're feeling good. What have you seen this past week to make you say you're feeling good?
I've been rethinking about exactly what I want to do and did a lot of self discovery to figure out where I want to take my career, my life forward. And I think just being able to kind of slow down and kind of think about what I'm doing instead of being in the thick of it has really helped me center myself a bit more. So, for example, I'm thinking it's not really the 9 to 5 corporate job that was destroying my mental state. It was the fact that the job itself was just not a great fit for me. So I wouldn't actually mind going back to a workplace if I could actually learn and be centered and have a goal of why I'm working there.
Oh, nice. So for those that still don't really get it, because some people are interesting that you say that, because I was just messaging an old high school friend and he's in a similar situation, except for he worded it as he's in the hamster wheel of corporate, which is not getting paid and just rinse and repeat. So if you resonated that in that kind of way, how would you implement some kind of learning to make sure you're not on a hamster wheel and you're still paid decently to have a relatively good lifestyle outside of work?
For sure. I think there's two mindsets of working for someone else. The first mindset is I want to work the least amount possible and get the most amount of pay, right? That's pretty obvious. The second mindset is I want to learn as much as I can, and I'm using their money, their resources, and their time to learn the skills that I need so I can get the hell out of here and either start my own business or go find another job.
Yeah.
Now, A is much easier to do because you just gauge, okay, how much can I get away with on my work? Maybe I work only 4 hours out of 8 hours, and that's enough output, and my manager's happy with that. And then I just focus on my hobbies and outside of work. That's fine. Or you have a longer term vision of, okay, I'm going to this job for 2 years and I want to learn these skills. I'm actually going to put extra time. And I don't think of it as I'm benefiting the company. I'm thinking of it as me paying my time. It's almost like paying for school, right? You're going to work, but you're actually learning. So let's say I wanted to learn marketing. I go find a marketing role. I could just chill, work for 4 hours a day, maybe, or I could go 8 hours and actually learn, produce results. And instead of thinking it as, oh, I'm producing results, I'm making the business money, I could think of it as now I know I could produce these results. And when I go sell as a freelancer, I could pinpoint back to case studies I've worked on during work.
Yeah, I definitely love that. And not only that, is you're just building relationships and networks as well. Because if you're just being absolutely honest and upfront, especially at the interview stage, saying that, look, I generally want to stay with you for the next 1 to 2 years, and that's solely just to learn. And by then, my goals aren't long term with you, but I'm willing to learn, willing to be as professional, as diligent. I'll give you 10 out of 10 work ethic. I'm just going to stick with it for the first 2 years and then I'm going to go. I bet a lot of bosses would understand that transparency, so that might just lead to a lot of connections within the 2 years because I generally feel like a lot of people aren't using authenticity, honesty as a leverage to be like, look, this is what I want in terms of goals. And a lot of people, most likely in the corporate 9 to 5, they generally hide behind a mask just to please some kind of expectation, not a person, because we generally, if we're not being authentic and we're not being honest to ourselves or to the people that we talk to, we're not pleasing anyone except for we're just putting a facade on. But wanted to get your point of view in terms of have you had any kind of experiences where you've noticed that being honest is a way higher leverage than just trying to protect some kind of insecurity?
Definitely. The way that I used to operate in corporate is to be low key, hide under everything, don't really show myself, and kind of just be part of the cog in the machine, right? And that's been the lesson that's taught to me throughout my entire journey of working. Like people say, don't trust your coworkers, they're not your friends, they're gonna backstab you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think they're lying. I think it happens a lot. But I do think it also depends on your mindset of going into it. If you're okay with putting in the extra work and helping out a coworker and without expecting anything in return, as long as you realize what you're trying to get out of that, it's not I want to help my coworker so I can get promoted. It's I want to help my coworker to build a relationship with him and potentially down the line we could be like friends at work because it's really hard to make real friends at work. But another thing is I read the study saying if you have at least one actual friend at work, the chance of you staying there is going to go 2x, 3x. Now, a lot of times when we go to work, we don't really trust anybody. We don't really trust our boss. We don't really trust our coworker. We're just kind of just there to get our paycheck. But really finding that one friend just like makes that experience so much better for everybody.
Yeah, I've noticed what you mean by that and how that kind of carries over to trying to be an entrepreneur and trying to make some online money. So going back to the first thing that you were saying about making mistakes and just being completely honest, I've noticed in the online space there's a lot of bloat or a lot of people flashing things around. And to some extent, that is addressing a market and that's addressing a pain point. And the reason why I'm wanting to do this podcast is because I generally feel that there's a massive hole in this kind of type of dialogue, this type of conversation where you're just saying what you're feeling, especially at the start, because no one talks about the first part because it's like not glamorous, it's not pretty. And this is all the behind the scenes in terms of like this is what it actually looks like from day zero to day one, potentially to like 365 and beyond. But the thing is, no one wants to talk about this because it's not glamorous. And the thing is, the fact that no one's talking about it, I just feel like that's a genuine hole that the market is missing because everyone wants to see the end product, but no one wants to go through the trenches. And one thing that I do want to add is I generally hate repeating myself. But one thing I'm starting to learn about marketing, especially if you don't have a high following or follower base, you kind of have to repeat yourself. And I just picked up on the fact that I was repeating myself because this is something that I said in the other episode. But knowing that new listeners potentially are jumping on and listening to this, I just have to keep repeating myself. And one thing that I'm taking this in terms of the mindset shift is that if you repeat yourself, you are just fine tuning your message. And on the other side, you're fine tuning your offer. So, I was on Freddie's Discord. I invited you to it a couple of days ago, and he had an AMA, and we were talking about offers. And he was like, okay, Phil, what's your offer right now if you have to sell it to me? And I generally said it's essentially just a short form agency. I provide consistent daily short form for top of funnel organic traffic to help generate leads organically. And then he was like, okay, who are you pitching it to? And I'm pitching it to founders, C-suite, startups, consultants, and agency owners. And he was like, yeah, that's actually not too bad. But you have to shape it in a way where you're addressing a pain point. People are more likely to be more curious or have more attention to a pain point versus a desire. So all what you're saying is you're telling, but you have to show. So you might have heard of the saying, show, don't tell, which essentially you show what the problem is, or you highlight why you need it. And the telling part is not going to be enough for them to be curious. So he would pitch it in terms of, uh, it sounds like you don't have an online presence. Have you ever considered doing short form? And it's just a different angle in terms of what I've said, but saying less, but giving them more value in a sense. But I wanted to get your thoughts in terms of what you're doing with your offer when you're tinkering it around with what you're getting from feedback, either from colleagues or your customers or anyone you're doing cold outreach to.
Yeah, constructing my offer has been a very big challenge. In the community I'm in, the AAA community, there's two schools of thoughts, which is A, niche down as fast as you can because the rich is in the niches, or B, stay general and let the market push you to a niche, right? You kind of organically work
Yeah,
with different people and then they
yeah,
request the same service and then you go, okay, I'm going to do that. My plan was originally to be a general agency and just take whatever job I can get. And the reason why is because I want to get experience. I want to actually build these things. And I'm not really too picky on the client that I'm working with or the project I'm doing. But I do think as I'm talking with more clients, as I'm building more systems, it's very obvious which systems are more interesting to people. So, for example, you could have a very complicated automation for this invoicing workflow for this logistics company. And that's great. It works for them. But if you want to sell that offer, no one's going to know what the hell you're talking about. Whereas if you're selling like a cold email system, I mean, everyone needs more leads. So that's way easier to sell. And you can sell to more people and you can refine that specific offer. So I'm thinking for me, I'm going to work on that offer. I'm going to present it. I'm going to run my cold email campaign and really get good at that because it's actually a multi-stage. I want to say it's a multi-stage like skill building. There's automation and there's also marketing because you need to write the copy for your clients. You need to make sure that you're responding correctly. Maybe you're even nurturing them a bit. So I think getting that down will be very helpful. And I actually booked a call for today that somebody wants a cold email. So I'm going to do a demo.
nice.
So I think the cold email and the marketing side of getting people the leads is probably a much better offer than, hey, I can help you with automation because no one knows what the hell that means, right?
Gotcha. And that's such a nice point of view because cold email, everyone thinks cold email is dead. I tried to do it, but I just found it way too complicated and it shifted in terms of like how I was trying to understand it. And it just, for me, it just seemed too tricky and maybe I needed like a course to get into. I did some videos into it, but for me, I just couldn't get it. But I definitely appreciate how powerful cold email is because a lot of people take information not just through video or through social media, but they definitely go through cold email. So I'm really excited to hear how that call goes. Do you know who Cody Schneider is?
I think I've heard that name before. Can you remind me?
Yeah. So he's essentially into marketing, mainly in how to scale with marketing. And there was an episode that I listened to actually yesterday, and he had a guest on about what metrics to measure for cold email. And the guest was talking about it's not open rates, it's not positive responses, it's how many emails do you have to do until you get someone to say yes. And that's the metric he uses. And then he's measuring every single component from when they say yes, and yes is I'm closing the deal, and then reduce the number of emails that need to be sent to get another yes. So essentially, he's measuring. how much volume. I'm not too sure if you're using that strategy or tactic or what metrics you're following, but I want to get your thoughts on that and how your strategy is for tinkering with emails and kind of copy.
Yeah, the cold email world is vast. So there's two, I guess there's two portions of cold email. The first one is the actual system building, right? The AI automation. What vendors do you pick? Do you use Instantly or Smartly? Do you use Phantom Buster or Apollo? That kind of stuff. The technical, setting up the DMARC, setting up your deliverability. What can you send? What can you not send? Basically, all the technical stuff. And then it's the copy of what is your actual message. And I think the actual message is deeper than the automation because at the end of the day, you can automate everything. If your message falls short or you're reaching the wrong target audience, no one's going to respond. So I think that messaging part is something that you could really, really get good at and really, really leverage as you get better and better. You could become like a rock star basically by really understanding how to write a good copy. And some tricks I picked up is social proof is king. If you
Mm.
just go in there saying I can do this, no one cares. You need social proof of I did this for another company and this is the results. And number two, instead of targeting a persona, like I target, I don't know, marketing agency owners that have 10 employees. Instead of targeting like a persona, you need to target pain point. You need to think about what are these marketing agencies dealing with that when they see my message, immediately it's like, oh shit, that's interesting. I wanna talk to them. Right. And to get to that is really hard because you need to do a lot of research on your ICP. You need to really understand what they're struggling with. And that's a lot of work. But I've seen reply rates of up to 25% of really, really good email market, which is insane, right? I get like 5%, and I think that's really good. So it's a really deep world that you can make tons and tons of money on the cold email.
Nice. And for those that don't really understand how cold email works and what it actually means, can you just really break it down to the basics and to see if anyone's actually interested? Because there's so many other ways to make money online. Can you give us your backstory in terms of why'd you pick up cold email and what it actually is and why it interested you in trying to pursue it? Because when the I, I would guess I could be completely wrong that the reason why not much people know about cold email, especially just normal like a B2C type of client customer profile, they'd be like, I don't want to do that because I didn't even open my emails. So what would you say to that?
Yeah. So first thing is cold email only works for B2B. So you're never going to do B2C cold email. It's illegal, in fact, in a lot of different countries. So
Yeah,
don't
I
do
think
that.
Australia, big time.
Yeah. So that's number one. And number two, I first discovered cold email when I read 100 Million Leads by Alex Hormozi, right? And he was talking about during gym launch, during COVID, their business went almost to zero. And what saved them was cold email. Why is cold email so powerful? Well, number one, your competitors don't know anything. They don't know what you're doing. You're not posting content. It's one to one. It's direct. Only you see it and your ICP, right? So that's number one. And number two, cold email is the most targeted channel ever because you're directly going to a specific individual's inbox, right? If you think about different channels, like I'm consuming Facebook, I'm consuming YouTube, you don't really know who's going to watch your video. You kind of have an idea. But with cold email, you can make sure that your email lands specifically to the person you're targeting. So that's number two. And number three is email is something that almost everyone has. Like a grandma that's 80 years old probably has an email account. So the scalability of it is insane, right? And then lastly, because of the AI revolution, back in the old days, if you really wanted to make cold email work, you have to do a lot of manual research. If you just send templated email to everyone, you're not going to get anything. So if I were to target Phil, for example, and I want to sell him, I don't know, cold email, I have to make sure, okay, Phil is a podcaster, he's doing this, these are his clients, do a lot of research, make sure that we have some report, and I'll send that cold email. Maybe he'll respond back to me. But now with AI, you could do a lot of that automated. Is it going to be as good as if a person did that research? No. But if you can get 80% there, that's good enough because the volume that you're able to do with AI is just 10x, 100x versus humans, right? So I think cold email is not dead. It's just different. It's just not the same as 5 years ago before AI.
Nice. And that's the thing. We're in an age where we have so much tools in our fingertips. We like the internet is a tool, but now that we've got AI, it's almost, I wouldn't say impossible. It's just the whole kind of sequencing of what tools can I use to leverage my time properly? Because time is the most important thing. But for you, Pete, if you could project what's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months for what you want outside of money to measure, like what's the worst case scenario that you could see happening? And what's the best case scenario that you can see happening? And how are you leveraging your decision making skills to avoid the worst case scenario?
Right. The worst case scenario for me is I continue down this road, I continue spending money on courses and software, and I make no money. That's the worst case scenario. Now, that's not even that bad because I probably learned a lot even if I did that. And the best case scenario is either A, I go back to a job that I love and I can learn a lot, or B, my business picks up and I don't need a job and I can just continue doing what I'm doing. I'm okay with both.
Nice. And let's just go into the worst case scenario because a lot of people, oh, a lot of people, even like myself, they think we tend to go to the worst case scenario and then we go into the whole mindset of paralysis over analysis. But you've got a really good mindset as opposed to you've already identified the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario is no money, but you're still learning. But let's just put ourselves in that environment. Okay, we lost some money, but we learned heaps. What happens next for you? Do you continue down that pathway and start continue to invest in yourself? Or is it more like a logistical thing where you're like, okay, I can't actually invest in myself because I still need to pay for bills. Do I go back to like a 9 to 5 and then come back to the entrepreneurial uh, journey once I've got my finances sorted? Because I feel like a lot of people, one, it's paralysis of analysis. Two, logistically, they don't have money to invest into a course. So, what would you actually do when you're like, okay, this is not working? I'm a bit frustrated as well, and I haven't made any money. I've learned heaps, which is a good thing. But where do I go from here?
Yeah, I think
Or where do you go from here specifically?
mhm. I think for me, the 9 to 5 is interesting that you brought up. I think a lot of people they especially after they take the entrepreneurship path, right? They think, okay, 9 to 5 is the worst thing ever. I was doing it and it wasn't working out. It was taking my soul, it was draining my soul, my time, and everything, right? But I actually think if you can align yourself and really understand what you're trying to get out of that 9 to 5, then you'll be fine. So what do you get out of 9 to 5? You get stability and you get learning opportunities and you get a network of people they can tap very naturally, right? Your coworkers, your bosses. If you just really take advantage of that, and of course, it really depends on your luck too, because you could end up at a shitty company and there's nothing you can do, right? That happens for sure. But I think this idea of I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I'm going to figure out everything myself might not actually be the fastest way to success. Because if you look at Alex Hormozi, even he learned a lot of his stuff by going to the gym guy and working under him for a month. That's how he learned how to run a gym, right? He didn't just open up a gym himself and figure all this out. He's going to be
Yeah,
bankrupt.
yeah,
So like it's not that bad to work under someone that you can actually learn. Now you really have to be careful of not just taking any shitty job just for the sake of feeling like you have a job. You need to be strategic, right? You need to be strategic on what you want to learn, where you want to be at in 5, 10 years. If your goal is to be good at marketing, running your own or agency, that's great. But if you're running your own agency, you're doing marketing, you're doing sales, you're doing delivery, you're doing project management, you're doing all sorts of things that's pulling you away from what you want to focus on. Whereas if you worked on a marketing job, chances are you're going to be working on that marketing and you're going to get really good at marketing. So it really just depends on what you want to get out of this journey. I think entrepreneurship is really good because it forces you to teach you everything in business all at once. And I think a lot of people they can benefit from that. But some people maybe they realize, oh, I've done all these things and I like delivery. So I'm going to go and become a software dev. Or, oh, I like sales actually. So I'm going to go do sales. So it really just depends. And it's really good for self discovery. I think everyone should give it a try to try and be a freelancer in entrepreneurship and just really figure out what you want to do. Because life is, it's limitless, right? We often get stuck into this framework of I'm just going to do this because it's been taught to me that way. I went to school for this. But if you really think about it, you can do almost anything you want, especially with the age of AI and internet. Like the fact that I'm talking to Phil here in Australia and we're in the opposite side of the world. I mean, it's a thing. It's happening right now. The potential is limitless.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting that you've had this kind of mindset because I've been curious about business for a very, very long time. So, in terms of my backstory, I've been very curious about a lot of things. And prior to business, I was into art. I was doing heaps of painting and doing digital
Oh,
art,
that's cool.
but I never understood what business meant because I didn't understand capitalism, why money is so important. And then I started reading a couple of business books. And off the top of my head, there was one by an Australian author, it's like Charge the Most, which is like an Australian version of Alex Hormozi's book. I didn't really understand it, but essentially it's all about niching down. And once you niche down, you can up the prices. And then I read a couple more books similar to that. And I was trying to think about why would people still do business if you're not into money? And then it hit me in my head. I still have this thought. Essentially, is the question you ask yourself is, what if you could make your dreams a reality, but the only thing that's limiting you is your inability to take risks because you've been taught a certain thing or you don't have the courage. And this sounds really, really wishy-washy, but the whole idea of business in my head is, can you actually make this dream or this idea that you have in your head come true? And now there's a couple of things that could come into play, which is a lot of things can go wrong. And ultimately, the market wants what the market wants. So if your idea in your head is something that you want to make happen, the next question is, would people buy my idea? And most likely, when you try to set up a business and you don't have much understanding about how business works, your idea most likely is gonna flop. It's because you haven't learned marketing yet. Because sometimes it's not an idea problem, it's how you want to pitch it to the market. Because everyone wants that $1 million idea, but no one has the skill sets or what to sequence to improve on marketing, which is pretty much led me to what I'm doing right now because marketing is almost everything. Because even if you have a 10 out of 10 awesome idea, if you don't know how to market it, then no one's gonna know you exist. So yeah, you're completely right. When it comes to entrepreneurship, you have to learn almost every single thing. And it comes ultimately the end product is you may or may not make money, but you're slowly developing to become like a full stack entrepreneur. And what I mean by full stack entrepreneur is like you're a generalist in most things, but then there's one thing that you really like and you choose to excel at. And either you build something on top of that, or you become so valuable to the market that a company's going to be like, oh, wow, we need you.
Exactly.
But
Exactly. I
I
think
wanted to, yeah, go, you go,
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the key, right? Instead of thinking about this as I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I'm going to start my own business, it should be like, what skill am I going to learn that's just going to be in demand forever? I don't care if I work with someone or I'm working by myself. It doesn't really matter. It's really how valuable is my skill set and how do I market myself in the marketplace? I could start my own business or somebody could hire me on as a CMO, CTO, whatever, right? Focus on your own skills.
for sure. And I wanted to pick your brain on personality types in terms of what kind of personality types would start to actually flourish or do well at the start. But if what kind of personality traits do you have that you're like, oh, okay, I definitely have an advantage over other people when it comes to this first part of starting a business or doing entrepreneurship because I can take on more pain, I can take on more kind of resilience. Have you seen anything that has been overwhelming to you in the past year that you're like, oh, I'm like, I just have to go through it because I've done something harder before. I know I can muster through this.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I think I did almost a 180 in terms of my mindset from a year ago to now. And a year ago, I was stuck in a corporate job. I was basically just living every day and letting the time pass. And in May, I really decided to, it's almost funny. I basically decided to do the exact opposite of what I would have done a year ago. So, for example, right, I read the book $1 Million Weekend, and in it, it talked about go outside, go buy a coffee, and ask for 10% discount. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool idea. I'm going to do that at some point. And I caught myself thinking, at some point. What do you mean by at some point? So immediately I'm like, okay, that's something that I'm thinking now, and it's normal. What is the complete opposite of that? The complete opposite of that is to put on my shoes and just go immediately. So I just went
Yeah.
and I bought a coffee and asked for 10%, got some weird looks. I'm alive. Nothing happened to me. And from that point on, I just thought, okay, humans are capable of more than they think. It's it's almost all of this is like a mental battle between you and yourself, right? I think that's what a lot of people realize towards the end of their journey is that a lot of the things that we work on that we're trying to achieve, it's not really a battle with the market or your enemy or your competitors. It's really a battle with yourself. And if you can overcome yourself, you're almost always going to win. But knowing that isn't enough because it's difficult, or else everyone would be successful. Like, it's really hard to battle yourself. Today I just want to chill. I don't want to do
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
right? Like you really need to rein in yourself, and you're going to tell yourself I'm a failure. And when you're doing fine, or you get a really good result and you think you're the best, and you get arrogant, and then you make a mistake, and then everything crashes, right?
Yeah.
It's
People,
very, very interesting. Yeah.
yeah, people want unordinary results, but they're not willing to go through the unordinary journey to get there. And do you know what an NPC is and that kind of terminology that's being used around NPC?
NPC as in non-playable character.
Yeah, you've heard that being used outside of the gaming world.
I was an NPC. I was a bot. Yeah. So I know exactly what you mean.
For those that don't know, can you give us like a reference in terms of what that means in terms of the coffee analogy?
Basically, it's just letting life pass, and you're not actually controlling your life. You're not the
Yeah,
player. You're just the non-control. You're just kind of in the background, right?
yeah,
And a lot of us get stuck in that because if you think about our education system, it trains you to be that kind of person. We're not taught to take risks. We're not taught to be entrepreneurial. We're not taught to bring on challenges. We're taught to work on this thing and then go to college and go work at a job. That's what we're taught. And it's not even just in Canada or Australia, it's taught almost worldwide. And I think as as technology advances, we've seen big data. The big data tells us that traditional education is going down and online education is going up. And I think somewhere in the future, maybe 5 to 10 years, we'll have a generation of people that will no longer be institutionalized, where the first thing they think about is going to college and take that traditional pathway. Instead, they'll think to themselves, I want to do editing. I'm gonna hire this coach to help me figure out how to do editing. And I'm not gonna go to like a 4 year degree for that. And I think at some point, maybe 5, 10 years, we'll get across where the traditional learning and the online will cross path, and then it'll go the other direction.
yeah. That would be really interesting because I kind of keep thinking about it. If I ever had kids or if I got to a stage where I was a grandparent, I probably wouldn't recommend them to go to university because one, my advice is completely different to what it could potentially be and what the world looks like 20 years from now. But going back to the first part about NPCs, I'm very petty in terms of like my personality traits, and I'm sure that anyone that's got to this part of the episode, like you've got some kind of pettiness inside of you, and it's more just to prove people wrong, or even just to prove yourself wrong. And when I heard of that analogy, like, are you an NPC? Like, what's the other option of NPC? You're actually a playable character, or you're player one. And the whole purpose of life is to make sure you don't live without any regrets. Or by the time you're on your deathbed, you can say you don't have anything in your mind, except for I lived a pretty goddamn grateful life, except for or instead of, oh, I could have, would have, should have done this. That's the worst because you know you could have, would have, should have done that. But anything stopping you was fear. And that's the biggest thing when it comes to business, sales, or just handling your own life in general. And when someone first introduced me to the NPC analogy, I was like, holy cow. As I get older, I am more and more fearful to be uncomfortable. And that's pretty much why I got into entrepreneurship and trying to be strategic, but also have a bit more courage in the decision making skills or the decisions that I make. Because a lot of people, when they make decisions, is one, they don't want to hurt someone's feelings or have the idea of like, oh, if I say this, am I gonna affect them negatively? And two, they don't really have that confidence to accept the backlash, if there was backlash. Because generally when people think about worst case scenario, they're like, oh, okay, if I say this thing, what kind of backlash am I gonna get? So that's generally what I wouldn't say what NPCs do, but they just don't respond or they don't have like a, I guess, agency to their dreams and to their goals. And if you don't have agency to your dreams and your goals, then by default, you're not going to have an extraordinary life. And the concern that I have for myself is that if I don't have this like burning as motivation, then I want to make sure that when it's all said and done, I can be like, okay, I did take some risk and I did live a pretty fulfilling life. And I am my own version of player one instead of an NPC. But for you, though, is there anything that you're trying to pick up on, especially with that coffee analogy that you're kind of trying to implement on a daily to make sure that, okay, this is an easy thing I can do to make sure that I'm not following back into the trap of like being passive about life in the day to day?
Yeah, I think just take daily actions that aligns with your goals. And for example, I go out for a walk every day and I've been actually slacking a bit on this, but I used to go out every day just in my neighborhood and I would go up to someone and ask them to do 5 jumping jacks with me to just to practice getting rejected, right?
Yeah,
And I counted 230 rejections on my phone. I'm supposed to get 1,000. I've been slacking. It's been about 3 months. So that's number one is to just take daily action that you're uncomfortable with so that your base level is higher than what it would be before. And number two is to then take that base level and do something extra. So let's say I get comfortable with asking people for jumping jack in my neighborhood. Maybe I'll go to another neighborhood and that would be like a +1 level. So that's what I would do is to just keep that base level and try to get better. But also another thing is something interesting you mentioned is you need to do extraordinary things to live an extraordinary life. I think that's definitely true, but it's also important to realize what kind of person are you, right? I think Alex Hormozi said this. Maybe it's okay to just be normal. Maybe that's the life that you're okay with. But the thing is, you would never know until you try the extraordinary step, and then you realize, okay, that's not for me. Maybe I'll go back to a 9 to 5 job, and I'm just happy. I'll have a family, and I'm spending a lot of time with my kids, and that's what I'm happy with. But until you kind of take the other path and see if that works out for you or not, you're never gonna know the what ifs, right? At that point, you're making a decision. You're deciding, okay, do I want to be an entrepreneur and have that sacrifice? Or do I want to be more family oriented and sacrifice the potential upsides? But at that point, at least you're making a conscious decision of picking instead of just going down one path and not even knowing that you could have walked down the other path and then regretting it later.
for sure. And that's really important for you to really understand like what you actually want. And one thing that I've been really thinking about and want to get your take if you're thinking about this as well is when you're watching people's journeys from going from their typical life into a successful life, there's generally a section in their story where they said, I hit rock bottom. And personally, for me, I've never hit rock bottom because I know it's probably like a feeling that you're like, oh, down in the dumps and I don't even know what to do. I feel helpless. like depressed mentally, just psychologically not going well. And for me, I'm just trying to figure out like why would someone get to that point? And when they do get to that point, how do you realize you're at rock bottom? Because for me, I'm doing everything I can not to get there. So I'm leveraging like my 9 to 5 to make sure that financially I can still fund this side hustle kind of scenario that I have to make sure the side hustle turns into the main thing. But for you though, Pete, what do you think is your rock bottom? What are you trying to do to avoid that? Obviously, homelessness is like the worst rock bottom that I could think of. I do not want to be homeless. But how do you avoid something like that to make sure that you're still doing what you're doing? Because ultimately, when it comes to business, and I said this before, it's not how much money you make, it's how long you can last.
Yeah, I think obviously you want to take care of yourself financially. If you're taking a huge financial risk, then I would say stay in your 9 to 5 and do a side hustle like Phil is talking about. I've also never really hit a rock bottom in that sense, but I do think that maybe a year ago, working on my job, that was pretty bad. And why was that bad? Objectively, my life was great. I have a pretty easy job. I'm making okay money. I'm saving up a lot of money. And if I just continue doing this, I'll retire maybe 56 years old and just be fine, right? The slow lane in not sure if you read the Millionaire Fast Lane by MJ DeMarco, but that's basically the slow lane where you just to work a job and invest your money and you can retire when you're 50 or 60. Now, why do I say that's a rock bottom for me? It's because it's so comfortable. It's so comfortable to a point where my brain was telling me this is not enough. This is not stimulating enough, and you might get depression doing this. Now, that's like a really big moment for me, right? To think that your own brain is telling you something's wrong, that whatever you're doing is not correct. You need to seek out something. And then just me telling myself, no, it's okay. I'm not going to do anything. This is fine. And that's like the worst because I think Alex Hormozi, it might have been Alex Hormozi or it might have been someone else saying there's a threshold. If your threshold is really low, it's really good because it's really easy to, like, if you're homeless, you're obviously going to make more money and then you want to get out of that homeless. So the threshold is very low. You're going to do something. And if your threshold is really high, that's also good because you're never gonna hit there anyways. So it's fine. The worst is when the threshold is like somewhere in the middle where it's like just good enough that you're like, okay, this is fine, but it's like not good at all. And I think a lot of people get stuck in the middle threshold where you're kind of just stuck in a limbo, right? You can't go up or down. You're never gonna get out of it. I think you said your friend was stuck in that rat race. That's exactly the feeling. You're just kind of okay. And then you live like that for 40, 50 years, you're going to get midlife crisis. You're going to hit all sorts of issues down the line.
Yeah, it just goes back to the topic that we've been harping up about in the past couple of minutes is when you do hit a low end or when you do struggle, you are going from middle to low or middle to negative, or you're taking a few steps back. But the fact that you're taking a few steps back, you're either one, you're addressing the problem, which is one, you're learning something because you've wasted your time or you wasted your money. And in your thought process, it's like, okay, I've wasted my time and my money. How do I make sure that this does not ever happen again? And surely I'm not the only one that has this problem. This is when the cogwheels start turning and the entrepreneurship mindset starts turning like, okay, if I'm having this problem, surely someone else is having this problem. And that kind of switches your mindset to like, okay, how do I get out of this problem? And I'm sure other people have this type of problem. So how do I help them? And then that's how you start to monetize, or that's how you start to help. But if you just stay in the middle, then you don't really have any pain. Well, you kind of do have pain, but it's kind of like you're kind of
It's not,
like
it doesn't hurt enough.
doesn't hurt enough. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's a good one. That it does not hurt enough. But I've been hearing a lot of you referencing Alex Hormozi. So I'm a big fan of him as well because he's really good at storytelling and he's really good at communication. But I wanted to ask you, what kind of ideas and references that you're taking from Alex Hormozi that you're applying to your day to day, and what actually why do you like him? Like, what are the main bullet points for people that who don't even know him to try to follow him to get some free value from him to understand how business works?
I think one of the greatest thing that Alex Hormozi has done is to bring business education to the mainstream. What I mean by that is, I think he said something like, if Jeff Bezos was filming content on how he built Amazon, it would have millions of views, but it's not there. He did not film that. So what Alex is trying to do is he's trying to film that. He has videos of when he was just building his gyms, right? And for for lack of a better term, us laymen who are not doing business or not successful, just watching someone's journey and learning the lessons that he's learned and just having that content all readily available on the internet is like a huge revolution, I feel like. I don't think business education should be go to school, get an MBA, and do all this theory. It should be very hands-on and very application based, right? And I think that's what he's doing a really good job of. Is his two books are fantastic. I don't know if you've read his two books, the $100 million offer and leads.
Yeah.
They're both
Big.
really good. And yeah, I just believe in his mission of bringing business education to everybody. It's a very good mission that I resonate with.
Totally agree. And going back to what you're saying about making business more hands-on, this is in my head how I see online education versus your typical university college education. Because you've got on one end, there's reputation when it comes to having a degree or a master's or PhD, but you're only referencing the latest research. And if you know anything about research, it takes at least 10 years to prove that it's either right or wrong. Now, on the flip side, with online education, you're faced with potential scammers and you're faced with potential courses that don't fulfill. But there's definitely gold out there when it comes to free value or when you invest into a program or a skill that you're going to learn something and then you can start to apply it. And the big thing that I think you and me are both seeing in terms of the shift of people doing more things online and less through college and university is the fact that in the online space, it's adapting to what's happening with the market and it's adapting really quickly and pretty much on the fly with what's adapting to culture and technology way more faster than what the universities are doing. Because within a university, you have like a council or a governance that says yes or no, we can add this to the course or the program, and that just takes a lot of time for everyone to say yes to. But when it comes to online, one person can make a course and it's one person making the decision and boom, you've got a course running and it all depends on if the market says yes or no, if they find the course valuable and that's when you can start to make money and that's how you can see value into it. But for you, when it comes to learning, because you and me both like to upskill in a lot of things, what kind of weaknesses or kind of things that you need to work on that you see right now to further improve with your progress and your journey in email marketing and also your entrepreneurial kind of mindset and journey?
I think one of the most important thing is figuring out what you actually want to focus on. And that's one of the weakness of entrepreneurship and starting a business is you're forced to do everything. And I think I talked about this a little bit previously is it's probably more efficient to focus on one skill at a time and really get good and then move on to the next one versus having to learn everything at once. And just on my journey, I think I could really get into the marketing automation because marketing is a fantastic skill to learn and automation is really cool. And I like building stuff hands on. But am I a software developer? No, I don't code. So I'm not going to become super technical in that sense. But am I a pure salesperson? No, not really. Marketing is kind of in that sweet spot where you're not directly talking to people. You can use data, you can kind of manipulate and use data and analytics and automation to kind of achieve your goal. And I think for me, that's a really good sweet spot that I can leverage a lot of my different skill sets. So it's really about doing that self discovery and figuring out what you want to do. And then when you get better, then you can branch out.
Definitely. And I'm absolutely on the same trajectory. I'm learning a couple of different skills, and ultimately, communication is my biggest weakness. And that stems from a combination of having an introverted personality and mindset and not willing to be outgoing. But I've noticed after learning sales, that's definitely changed. And the way I speak and the way I can convey my messaging has improved a lot more. But being confident and also being confident to make mistakes, because what I've been seeing, and I've said this time and time again, when someone makes a mistake and they give up, it's very likely that they had high expectations and they couldn't execute on their high expectations. So therefore they have disdain in that moment in time to be like, this isn't for me. I'm just going to go back to the middle. I'll go back to my baseline, which is NPC. I need to be back on the hamster wheel because that's what I'm used to, and not being, okay, this was a mistake. I'll just take it because I know there's going to be more like this. And the more I take, the more I get better because I might be running to the same mistake, but I know people are going to go backwards. But the only way forwards is just hitting through as much brick walls as you can. I'm not too sure if you read The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, and his kind of ethos is he's a big believer in stoicism and he's big believer in Marcus Aurelius in terms of the only problem is what's in front of you. And to know what's in front of you is the first thing that you think of in your head that you're not going to do, which is essentially what you were saying before about the coffee analogy is like, can I ask for a discount? And culturally, that's just not accepted because they're like, what, why?
Yeah.
But if you go through that, you just learn so much. But I want to ask you one last question before we wrap up. Do you have any recommendations outside of Alex Hormozi that you would recommend people that to either watch a podcast or to read a book or to watch some kind of free value to get them started into their entrepreneurial journey and to stop being, dare I say, like an NPC?
I think Ali Abdal is really good. And he's not really focused on business per se. He's more of a productivity person. But man, productivity and how to stay on the productivity road for a long time. His book is called Feel Good Productivity, is almost more important than any business knowledge that you can gain. And the reason why I say that is because, of course, we all know the last man standing wins, not the best. So, how do we make sure that we're last man? Well, we need to make sure that this journey is fun and it's balanced and we feel good about it. Now, beating ourselves up every day and saying things like, oh, I could have done more and stuff is not the way. So, in his book, he talks about three main areas that we can focus on, three P's. First P is play. Make sure whatever you're doing is kind of like a game, set up as a video game, and make it very fun. Maybe even 10% more fun. That's good enough. The second one is power. So having that power and in a sense ownership of what you're doing, which is why people hate 9 to 5 because you have zero agency, you have no power. But I
Mm,
think but I think you can get agency and power in a workplace. You just need to be strategic and political about it, which was something I did not know even existed. I didn't do that. So that's the thing. And then the last one is people, right? So important to have people that are with you, that are not dismissing you. Like everyone around you when you first start a business are going to be like, you're crazy. Go back to the job. What are you doing? My mom tells me that every day, right? And just having people that understand your journey, that are growing with you, and also people that you wanna look up to, and also importantly, people that are not as far as the journey and you can share. Just everyone, right? Just having that support group is so important. So yeah, Ali Abdal, and then if we're going to get into more technical stuff, The E Myth is a really good book by Michael Grenfield. Sorry, I forgot the name, but it's basically about building a system, building a business in terms of franchises. Then let's see, what are some other books I've read that's really good. So $1 Million Weekend by Noah Kagan, that was the first business book I've ever read, and it got me out asking for coffee, right? So
Mm.
that was interesting. And then the 4 Hour Work Week was interesting read. I don't think it's applicable to everyone. And to get to that 4 Hour Work Week, I think we talked about this during the last podcast. That's like a 10-year journey to get to that point. But one lesson is delegate, hire like virtual assistants, which is very interesting. I think going on Upwork and trying to hire a virtual assistant, going through that experience will be very beneficial to any business owner because you're going to have to hire eventually. So hiring contractors, kind of step one, training wheels. And yeah, just so many things I learned over the past 3 months. It's actually insane. I think we can sit here and talk for hours about just lessons that we learned.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate your time because essentially that's pretty much why I'm doing this podcast because I'm itching my back as well because I'm learning a fair bit from you and other guests that I have on. And ultimately, this is what I'm layering because prior to doing a podcast, I was consuming podcasts, which I have nothing against that because podcasts are an amazing source of information. But until you change your behavior, podcast becomes pretty much like junk food or you just become a consumer to it. And there's such an abundance of knowledge with podcasts, and it will only stay knowledge unless you implement it and start applying. So for those that are still in the hamster wheel of podcasting and you're just consuming information, like just ask yourself, like, why do you find it interesting? And two, if you do find it interesting, are you going to do anything about it, or are you just going to listen to the next thing? Because the next thing would most likely be interesting, but you just got to ask yourself, why is it interesting? And is it only just to pique your curiosity, or are you going to do something about it? But on that note, I just want to appreciate your time, Peter. Uh, really want to have you on again because I want to know what you're going to get up to in either in a week's time or in a month's time, because I definitely, you know, have full belief that you're going to excel with your cold email. If it's not cold email, it'll be definitely something else because it's more just the mindset versus the application. And that's pretty much what been discussing. But Pete, where can people find you? And if anyone's listening and who wants cold email, like what's the best way to communicate with you?
Yeah, I'm usually on LinkedIn. I post daily on LinkedIn, and that's my platform of choice for now.
Awesome. Appreciate your time, and I'll definitely catch up with you next time, Pete.
Thank you.
Alrighty.